Welcome to the channel if you're new here, and welcome back if you're not. It is shot by Curt. So I made a video about if the Canon C70 was worth it in 2023 and here in 2024. And while I feel that it is worth it, this video is why it might not be worth it in 2024. So to start, it's a Super 35 sensor, it's a crop sensor. So the exact crop for this camera, if I'm not mistaken, is a 1.45 times crop. So if you're shooting with a 16 mil, it becomes 24. If you're shooting with a 24, it becomes 35. If you're shooting with a 35, it becomes 50, so on and so forth. Now, that could mean something to you, it could not. But that's something that I didn't take into consideration when I was buying the camera, especially coming from the R5. I bought all full frame lenses because the Canon R5 is a full frame camera. And in this case, I knew that there was a crop, but I just didn't think that it would be that big of a deal, especially when I used it. I used other people's C70 before I got mine with RF and with EF without the 7.71 adapter, and it just didn't seem like a big deal. And now being in certain situations that I've been on certain shoots and the crop kind of came and bit me in the butt. I was in a small room and just couldn't get the coverage that I needed because I didn't have the proper wide lens to get the shot that I needed, and it was low-key a headache, I'm not even gonna lie. So that's, something that you might want to take into consideration, that this is a crop sensor camera, and if you already invested in full frame lenses, then you got something to think about. Now, speaking of lenses, let's get into the lens options. They do have RFS, which is pretty much the crop sensor lenses, but they're nowhere near in comparison to the L series glass that we have now. But with the lens options, you have either RF, L glass, full frame, and then you deal with the crop, or you can spend that $600 extra and get the 0.71 adapter, go back and buy EF glass, and then kind of set your camera up that way until Canon decides to make a full frame option of the C70 or something of the sort. With the 0.17 adapter, you almost get that full frame look, and you get like an extra stop of light as well, which is actually going to move us into the next point. It's not that great in low light. It's actually not great at all in low light. If you're a run and gun shooter, I personally would steer away from it. If you can't control lighting or be in ideal lighting, I would just steer clear of it. Another thing about it being bad in low light is while you don't buy a cinema camera for autofocus, the autofocus is pretty much non-existent. At that point, if you can't pull manual focus, don't even buy the camera. It's not worth it unless you're going to keep it in optimal light to where the autofocus can work the way that you want it to work, be able to track faces or objects or whatever the case may have you. But low light, I'm not willing to go past 3200, and even that's a stretch just because of the noise. Yeah, it's just not worth it. Now, another thing to take into consideration is that SD cards are actually kind of expensive for this camera. If you get the V90 cards, which is what's suggested for the camera, to where you can record all of the frame rates and the codecs and everything with no problem, they suggest you go V90. But I have been told that you can get V60, and those are a little bit cheaper. But what's crazy to me is a 512 SD card V90 for this camera is $600. And again, in the other video, I think I talked about it, I bought a CF Express 1 terabyte for $550 after taxes, and now even a 512, like, they're all just getting so much cheaper and they're so much faster than these SD cards. And the SD card is $600, and it's 300 megabits or 300 megabytes or whatever. And the CF Express is pretty much 2.5 times that at minimum, which, yeah, I don't quite understand, but that's something to take into consideration. Not the biggest deal to me, because obviously I'm using the camera, but these are things that I've just been kind of noticing since I've owned the camera, and just little gripes that I have at this point with the camera. Now, with all that being said, I still feel like the camera is worth buying. It just depends on what you do and what situations that you end up in. If you're a run and gun shooter, it's doable, but you just gotta be careful, especially with the low light thing, of the situations that you end up in. If you're willing to have grain in the shot or an excessive amount of grain in the shot, absolutely fine, do your thing. But if you end up in low light situations on a regular basis, yeah, it might not be worth it. But anything past that, with any sort of just decent lighting, like it's pretty solid. So I still feel like it's worth buying in 2024. I'm still gonna use the camera, but these are some gripes that I feel like needed to be talked about, at least from my perspective, since I've owned the camera. Now I'm pretty sure as I use it more, I'm still fairly new to owning the camera, but I'm pretty sure as I continue to shoot more, end up in situations that I can't control or whatever the case may have you, that I'm gonna figure out more little things that are gonna be annoyances when I'm on site or when I'm on shoots, and ways to have to work around them. So yeah, with all that, like and subscribe for the good vibes.